Welcome everyone to the Oncology Research Professional Site Operations meeting. Here we are for our 4th virtual meeting. We started in April, the very first virtual meeting of the cooperative groups that I can remember, or the NCTN research bases, and now this is our 4th time. So hopefully we'll see you in Seattle in the spring, but in the meantime, next slide please. A few logistical details for today's meeting. We are recording this session so that we can post it for those who aren't able to join us today. Please do keep your phone and your computer on mute to help with sound quality. We are going to use the chat button at the bottom of your screen for questions and answers throughout the meeting. So please do take advantage of chat. If we run out of time, we will include the answers, if possible, in the summary comments that will get posted to the website afterward. We're hoping that the comments and the content from this meeting will be up within a few weeks. Although there are no formal CE credits for this meeting, you can print a copy of the agenda, which Courtney Wiley posted for us on the main website. Print that, document the amount of time you spent, and sign and date it, and you can use that for your record for SOCRA. Next slide, please. Today's agenda is very full. We're going to try hard to stick to this and stay on time, but we have representatives from the NCI here to give us some important updates. The CIRB is with us this time. We have some important SWOG updates. We're going to end with some fun thoughts on life that I encourage you to stick around for, even though for those on the East Coast, it's getting close to supper time. And then we'll wrap up rapidly and try to be out on time. Next slide, please. We have a number of announcements, and we are going to include these in the slide deck, so I'm going to go very quickly through these. Next slide, please. Depending on your schedule tomorrow, I would strongly encourage you all to join us for the centerpiece of our ORP education, which is the Jerry and Noboru Oishi Symposium. We have a great lineup of speakers, followed by a very informative and practical open forum tomorrow. So make sure that's on your agenda. Next slide. ORP is a unique acronym for SWOG, but it stands for Oncology Research Professionals, which means all of you who are attending today, this is us, this is you, this is we. And as you know, we're the front line. We play a crucial role in the development, implementation, and analysis of SWOG clinical trials. And there's a number of ways to get involved if you'd like to be more deeply involved in just learning and listening and conducting studies at your site. There are some liaison positions that are open that we want to share with you. Next slide, please. If you haven't considered liaisons before, there are some details that will be in the slide deck about what that involves. Next slide, please. But we have currently at least 6 open positions for liaisons, and there's also something called an at-large liaison. But this is where members of our ORP community can serve as representatives to help develop protocols, give feedback, so forth and so on. So we really encourage you to join the team. Next slide, please. There's a website here that you can send in your application. There are 2 pieces that go with that. One is your CV, and there's a form online that you can just simply fill out and have your PI or site leader sign with you and submit that, and we'll take a look and get to you right away if we can and get you involved in committees. Next slide, please. We do have a representatives section on the ORP webpage, so we want you to check that out. It's on the SWOG member website. We also now have an email where you can just throughout the year, the season, send questions, and certainly throughout the meeting, orp@swog.org. We're trialing that to see if that's a way we can continue communicating. Next slide, please. There's a lot on the CRA workbench, and if you haven't looked at that in a while, we encourage you to take a look. Next slide. There was a new newsletter posted, I believe, last week, so if you haven't checked that out, look for the CRA newsletter and certainly give feedback and questions. So be sure to take a look at that and give us any ideas for the future. Next slide, please. Something new, definitely take a look at this announcement when you find the slide deck, but there is a clinical research section with resources listed that may be of great help to you, and this is new on the SWOG website, so check that out. Next slide. Just to alert you that there are some funding opportunities, and certainly if you're thinking of coming to the Seattle meeting in person and you'd like to see if there's any funding available, there will be an announcement posted usually by January for applicants for that. Next slide. Actually go quickly through the next 3. I just want to highlight some Hope Foundation funding opportunities if you're involved, especially in grants for strategy and study development. Next slide. Next slide 2. And again. There is a survey coming out that we want to alert you to. This is a joint NCTN group venture where some folks from across different groups have been working together on site operation challenges, and we're going to hopefully send this out to memberships from all the groups sometime in the next month, and really would welcome your feedback. It'll probably be about a 5-minute survey, but to try to quantify and identify some of the burdens that sites are facing so that we can address those in a new and I think combined way. Next slide, please. Just a couple more reminders. If you don't know who to call, there's a really great listing of key contacts on the CRA workbench. The dates here for Seattle. Next slide, please. I'd just like to share with you who our current ORP Executive Committee members are and express my thanks to all of them for working hard through these unusual times. Their names are listed here, and I deeply appreciate their help and contributions to our committee. Next slide, please. So our opening speaker today is Andrea Denikoff, who's here from the NCI. And so next slide, please. We'll take this away, Andrea. It's all yours.
Hey, thanks, Connie, and I'm happy to be here. And sorry, I've got a glitch going on with my computer video, so you won't see my little picture come up. But I'll jump right in since I'm assuming the majority of people are aware, but Connie thought it would be good to make sure that I presented to make sure everyone's aware that the Ctep policy on advanced practice providers ordering anti-neoplastic agents in our trials has been updated. And next slide. So I'm just going to quickly review that. Connie thought you all would be interested in some of the survey results that supported the update, and then just quickly go over and make sure everyone's aware of the implementation. Next slide. So I'm jumping right to the end of the story, which is that we do have a new policy. Before it, if some of you might not have been aware, the Ctep Investigators Handbook, which hasn't been updated since 2014 and is in need of it, but thankfully Dr. Mooney was okay with us moving ahead to update this one component, which the previous component only allowed Aepps to write study agent orders if there was a registered investigator around to co-sign. And that, as you all know, created a lot of barriers for sites. And in that same handbook, the term investigator definition is any physician. And we know there have been updates to who an investigator can be. So on September 7th, we've updated that for patient orders for any type of study agent in one of our trials, either an IND agent or standard of care. It can be written by a qualified Aepv without a physician co-signature. And one component of being a qualified Aepv is that they have to be registered within the NCI's registration and credentialing roster, or RCR, as a non-physician investigator, otherwise known as a NPIVR. And for those trials that have require a delegation of task log, the NPIVR must be assigned to the task of IND prescribing, and the clinical site investigator must sign the DTL to say that the qualified NPR can now do this. Next slide. And in terms of what is a qualified Aepv, and some of this came out in our survey and interviews with sites, and we're using the broadest definition that actually we found through the Advanced Practitioner Society for Hematology Oncology, as we wanted this to be as broad as possible per state regulations that are out there. So it does include nurse practitioners, physician's assistants. Some states have clinical nurse specialists allowed to write orders, advanced degree nurses, pharmacists, again, who are all licensed and qualified for their local state laws and have a qualified institutional policy. And where it's applicable to international sites that also allow these have these type of regulations. And then the trials covered under this policy are the DCP NCORE studies, and then those within the division I'm in, the Division of Cancer Treatment and Diagnosis, and Ctep, Cancer Therapy Evaluation Program, is NCTN trials, ETCTN, and some of our other consortia, such as the PEP-CTN and some others. Next slide. So this is what applies to you all as in terms of site operations, to have this policy implemented at your site, in which many of you, we learned from our survey, already have an institutional policy that qualifies APPs that have credentialing processes at your site to write study agent orders. And many state and localities have such laws and regulations that support this. Because of what, there's a GCP requirement that says a qualified investigator must be responsible for all trial-related medical decisions. I put this in there just to make sure that everybody's institutional policy has that statement, so everybody's in compliance with GCP. And then this policy that sites have can just be stored in the site's regulatory files. So upon audit, if an auditor says, you know, who are your qualified APPs, you have your list in RCR, but then you also can just show them, here's our institutional policy we have that is available for review if needed, of how we qualify our APPs to write study agent orders. And then the other two bullets, APPs will have to maintain their, of course, their registration and qualifications, and those get verified annually in RCR, and that the site clinical investigators will have to identify those, and also the site DTL administrators, we made that they could also help with this, getting this implemented and organized, the task for the IND prescribing for APPs. Next slide. And then there's a hyperlink in these slides for the Ctep website, because I know this is hard to see as a slide, but the official memorandum from Dr. Mooney is listed, as well as the document policy, and some brief slides are all there for you to share within your sites. Next slide. So now I'll just give you a few of the survey details, because I think some of the findings were interesting. Next slide. And I'm assuming everyone's aware of the background. I already mentioned GCP and our Ctep, but there was a published study in 2018 done by ASCO, but ASCO actually collaborated with a number of organizations, I believe ONS and AACI and some others. And in their survey in 2018, they found that over 40% of APPs did require a physician had to co-sign their orders. But interestingly enough, there were 25% of APPs reporting that they were not even allowed to order any chemo. And certainly when I've looked at state laws and regulations across the country, there is quite variability. So I guess it depends how many survey completers were at maybe states that have more restrictive regulations. And certainly what we heard across the board from NCORs, from LAPs, from rostered sites, is that it was creating a barrier to interrupting workflow, and that many sites had already created these credentialing processes. Industry trials were actually allowing no co-signatures, and that there was also this pharmacy ordering barrier about how the security levels were set, and that was really creating barriers too. Next slide. So given all that background, we worked with our internal NCI investigators, as well as our colleagues in DCP, such as Marge Good, my colleague Grace Mishkin, our Ctep leadership, several cancer centers that were actively discussing with us the urgent need for this change. And so we created this electronic survey that was sent out in March. We sent it to the PI grants because we were trying to see if we could get a response rate. So we sent it to the LAPS, ETCTN, and NCORE grants, PIs. And we did ask for one reply per grant, but lots of people like to share. So we got more than one from some sites, but we did receive 80 completed responses from across the country, which was great. Next slide. And we did get every responder saying yes to the question of, does your site have advanced practice providers involved in patient care for people with cancer at your site? And then you can see, we just asked people, we didn't want people to go around counting, but we asked them to estimate. And you can see that there's some sites have 10 APPs at their sites, and then other larger sites have many more. And I would assume the one that says 600 plus more, that could have been potentially an NCORE site with lots of satellites that were included in there. But I think the bottom line is there's been a huge growth in the past couple of years of APPs being involved at our sites. Next slide. And this just slide represents, we wanted to see the breakdown of the types of trials APPs were involved in. So you can see they're very involved in phase 2 and phase 3 trials, but still there's a fair number of them, almost 70% being involved in of the 72 responders for this one in phase 1 trials. Next slide. And this one, I'll walk you through this one. It's a little busy, but I find it best to be on one slide. And thanks to my colleague, Grace Mishkin, for helping me pull this data together. And Grace, I see that you joined. I'm so glad you could join. So the top one is the question about, for NCI agents, does your site allow APPs to, going from left to right, start a new study agent order? And the middle one is modify doses after initial plan. And then the last one on the right is order continuation. And so we know from our policy that they were either not allowed, or you could only order with a physician cosign. Not allowed is red, and order with a physician cosign is yellow. So you can see across the board, they were not allowed, but you can see that there was a lot of ordering with physician co-signature for modifying or continuation with the NCI agents. And then in the middle row, these are non-NCI trial agents. So this was where we had heard from cancer centers doing industry trials, as well as some NCORE sites, that some of them would allow an order without a physician cosign, and that's in blue, and hopefully it's coming up blue on the screen. But you can see only very few would allow them to start a new order, but then the numbers go up to 20 and 23% to modify after initial plan or continue an order. And then when we get to standard of care agents, SOC agents at the bottom, and standard of care could be from, hormonal therapy to oral agents to, across the board. So many more APPs were allowed to start new orders without a physician cosign, that's in blue, and it goes up to 54% for ordering continuation of planned. So you can see it's really been changing since that, especially since that 2018 ASCO survey. Next slide. Let's see, please clarify if this situation of an APP will need to be on a DTL site needs a policy. So this is the policy that does say if you have your APP has to be credentialed as a NPIVR, and they have to be on your DTL. So in terms of the survey question of credentialing, we did find that 42 of the 71 respondents, or 60%, said that APPs were involved in some way with ordering agents, and that the majority, only 9 said that they did not have yet an APP credentialing process. However, of those 9, they all required a physician co-signature. So, the ones that said they weren't sure if there was a credentialing process, because you can imagine these are PIs probably filling this out quickly, wasn't sure. 2 of them were allowed to have their APPs order without a cosign, and 1 had it with a cosign. But we didn't, unfortunately, these sites didn't identify themselves. So, but hopefully with this policy, they'll now see clarification that they do need some type of credentialing process. Next slide. We were asked specifically to ask about the role of pharmacists, because we did hear from several sites that pharmacists are very involved in writing orders for anti-neoplastic agents. And you can see that 48% said yes, they are, 44% said no, and then there were some that were not sure. And then some of the comments people wrote in were that some sites have stated that the pharmacists are really writing a majority of their orders in there and building their EMR. So they play a really key role. And they often draft and modify treatment plans and do some verifications. And there were a few sites that indicated that pharmacists could write anti-neoplastic orders, but only with the physician cosign. And I'm aware that I think it's the state of North Carolina actually has a special regulation about this. Next slide. Okay. And I thought you all would appreciate seeing this. We decided just to be direct and ask sites, does your site perceive the NCI policy to be a barrier for ordering in Ctep trials? 30% said yes, 70% said no. And the comments from that were that because of modifications are frequently needed, the co-signing represents a burden. The time constraints, that NCI's policy doesn't align with state and institutional policies, and that it's difficult for the staff to remember, you know, we can do this for non-NCI trials, but we can't do this for NCI trials. So really led to confusion at sites. Next slide. And then we asked if we actually allow the sites to write orders without the cosign, would APPs be involved more? And overwhelmingly, people said yes. And again, said it would reduce staffing burdens, allow physicians more time for new enrollments, reduce complexity, and hopefully might lead to more steady recruitment enrollment to have APPs more involved in NCI trials. Next slide. So I thought we were on a call with the CTSU recently about the DTLs. And again, thanks to my colleague, Grace Mishkin, put this together really quick and looked at our data as of October 4th. And again, since the policy was implemented less than a month ago, we've already had 92 sites that have approved NPIVRs for the IND prescribing task on DTLs. Up to 78 protocols so far. And there's been almost 400 individual APPs that have been approved for the IND prescribing task. So yes, that's almost 400 APPs across 92 sites. And then you can see the list of the 78 protocols, and they go across the groups. You can see SWOG, there's 15 SWOG protocols were of those included, including LUMMAC subprotocols, some ETCTN, and 1 PEP-CTN. And next slide. And then of the 92 sites with approved NPI VRs thus far, of those sites, 15 of them were LAPS grantee sites, 52 were NCORE grantee sites, and 17 were rostered sites. And as you know, some LAPS and some NCOREs can also do ETCTN protocols. So 11 sites added those, and some COG sites can also be PEP CTCN sites. So there is a little overlap, but I think implementation's gone very well so far. And actually, let's see what's the next slide. I think might just be our contact information. Yeah, and so far we've had only one question regarding the Aepv policy come in. And I think people are very happy with it in general, because we're really, the focus is on allowing state, local institution policy direct this, because we realize that institutions, states, regulations all do this a little bit differently. And NCI is a research organization, not a credentialing organization. So this is really up to states, local, and institutions to set up these policies. And we did ask, at least I work closely with the LAPS sites, and we had a few LAPS sites, actually Mayo Clinic in particular sent us their credentialing, but I think it would be a great practice for those of you who feel good credentialing processes for your Aepvs to share with each other to prevent reinventing of the wheel for those sites that may not have them yet. But I don't know, Connie, do we have time for a few questions, or?
I think we have about 2 or 3 minutes, so shall we do it?
Sure.
If people can send their questions in the chat. All right, 2 minutes in the chat. There's one there now, perhaps. Caitlin, can you help us with that?
Sorry, I think it was a follow-up with Brandy just sending out everything. So I think that we have appropriate clarification at this point. Brandy, please chime in if we didn't answer your question thoroughly.
Let's see. Oh, I can see the chat. For the physician investigator who enters the orders for chemo, they're out of town, and directs the Aepv that is an NPI-VR to review labs and within normal limits can instruct to continue the previous order. Does the Aepv need to be on the DTL and the site need a policy? I would think so. I would think yes, because even though they're continuing the order, you're not going to have that out of town. The whole point is you don't have to have that out of town physician sign that order. So to sign it, for that Aepv to sign it independently without a cosign, they should be on the DTL and they should have a site policy. I think you'll just be safer that way. Because essentially that's what they're doing, is they're writing the order without a physician cosign, correct?
Well, thank you, Andrea. We look forward to figuring out how to implement this. And I think the question mark that we all have site-wise is what additional policies might be in place or needed, whether it's at our home central office, whether it's at each specific practice or site location. I know that's a challenge that we'll be working through locally at our site. I really appreciate all the work that went into this, the background, the story, the leadership that you and Jamie Myers and others and Marge Good and folks around the world actually, it feels like have worked on for a number of months, if not years, to make this happen. And it should reduce the barriers for our patients, especially with the evolution and the role of the Aepvs expanding. Thank you very, very much, not just for your presentation, but for your hard work on this front.
Yes.
We deeply appreciate it.
You know me, Connie, anything we can all work on to make all of us, do trials better, more efficiently, take care of patients better, we're in. So, and thanks to you all for all the work you've done to help make this happen too.
All righty. Well, thank you so much. Let's move to our next presenter. I'm really glad to say that we have the CIRB back, and I think it's been about 2 years since we've had this this connection with our CIRB colleagues. And today we have Angela Norman and Laura Covington. I think it's been 2 years, literally. We were just discussing that before the meeting, standing in Chicago together, that Angela was with us.
Yes.
So welcome and take it away.
Well, and it what has been two years, so I'm just thankful that we are moving on, and I'm here today. So officially, good afternoon. I'm Angela Norman, and I am an administrator for the NCI CIRB. Thank you for this opportunity to present to you today. Okay, so next slide. That's not my slide.
Next slide, keep going.
Yeah, keep going until we get to, yes, okay, keep going, one more. Okay, here we are. All right, so today's agenda includes an overview of the CIRB and updates involving CIRB operations, specifically remote consent and the revised PI worksheet. Next slide. First up is a quick overview of the CIRB. Next slide. As many of you know, the NCI-CIRB started as an initiative to establish a streamlined IRB process based on recommendations from the 1997 Armitage report. So we started in 2001 with the adult CIRB late phase emphasis, followed by the pediatric CIRB in 2004, the adult CIRB early phase emphasis in 2013, and then the cancer prevention and control CIRB in 2015. Along the way, the NCI achieved AAHRP accreditation in 2012, and we were reaccredited in 2015 and again in 2020. Next slide. So as I mentioned before, the NCI-CIRB is comprised of 4 boards. The adult CIRB late phase emphasis reviews adult phase 3 trials from the NCTN. The adult CIRB early phase emphasis reviews trials from the ETCN. The cancer prevention and control CIRB reviews trials from the adult NCORE and consortia and CTNet. And the pediatric CIRB reviews all phases of pediatric NCTN and NCORE studies. Next slide. Okay, so here's a quick overview describing interactions with the CIRB. Next slide. So the CIRB is structured for central and local review, and both the CIRB and the participating institutions have their own responsibilities. The CIRB reviews studies for initial, continuing, and amendment reviews, trial-wide and locally occurring potential unanticipated problems and serious or continuing non-compliance. In addition, the CIRB conducts reviews of current CIRB approved studies that have an enrolled participant that becomes incarcerated while on the study. As far as institutions, institutions are responsible for oversight of the research at the enrolled sites, including ensuring there is adequate staff and resources at the sites, identification and reporting of locally occurring unanticipated problems, and any issues involving HIPAA. Next slide. Okay, as a quick summary of what is considered local context, it is based on the local population at the institution and involves any unique requirements and protections for the institution's vulnerable populations, as well as investigator resources. This information is provided to the CIRB through submission of the annual signatory institution worksheet, the annual PI worksheet, and study-specific worksheets when the PI is ready to open the study. Next slide. Okay, so this is a flow chart outlining the CIRB's review process. So just a quick summary is that the study chair submits the study protocol for NCI review. The NCI protocol information office issues an approval on hold and sends the study documents to CIRB for review. Once the CIRB approves the protocol, NCI submits a final approval. The study is then distributed by the networks to enrolled institutions. The local context review kicks in at this point. Next slide. So when the PI is ready to open a study, the local context review begins with the submission of the study-specific worksheet to the CRB for review and approval. And this flow chart just summarizes that process. Next slide. For all institutions using the CRB, an authorization agreement is required between the CRB and institutional official at the signatory institution. This agreement defines the responsibilities of the CRB and the institution. Next slide. Okay, and so this slide and the next slide outline the CRB and institutional responsibilities in a little more detail. So as I said before, the CRB conducts the study reviews, local context reviews, and reviews of local and trial-wide unanticipated problems and serious and continuing non-compliance. Next slide. And the institutional responsibilities include reporting details regarding the affiliate and component institutions, PI changes, regulatory audit finding, boilerplate language, and they're responsible for maintaining a regulatory file. Next slide. So how do you get information about the CIRB? Next slide. So our main source is through the CIRB website. So recently we refreshed and revised the website based on feedback from the participating sites to hopefully make it easier to use. So we have revised the way we provide information to new users, institutions, networks, and board members. We also reorganized the quick guides to identify an action and the steps needed to complete it. So next slide. So this is just a screenshot of one of the updated website pages. Next slide. And here is the new user webpage that I mentioned before, which I believe is new to the website. So hopefully it will provide a little bit more information for people who've never used the CRB before. Next slide. And this is a screenshot of, again, of a new page that outlines the different websites associated with the CRB. And so sometimes we do get questions about, you know, what do you do on which website that's associated with the CRB? So hopefully this table will provide kind of a summary of what to do where. Next slide. So the next update I have is about remote consent. Next slide. So the remote consent procedure was implemented due to the COVID-19 public health emergency. As the emergency is still ongoing, the procedure is still in place and is used when consenting or reconsenting participants using a consent form that requires a signature. So the consent form must be provided to the potential participants or their LAR prior to the consent discussion. As a recommendation, if it's mailed, then two copies of that consent form should be sent. So the consent discussion is conducted by the provider via phone or video conference with the potential participant or LAR. It requires a process to verify the identity of the participant. It requires a witness. And if the potential participant or LAR agrees to participate, it requires the consent form be signed and returned to the investigator. Next slide. Some additional clarifications. A designee may be used to obtain remote consent per the institution's local policy. This information would be identified using the annual PI worksheet. And as mentioned before, a witness is required for obtaining remote consent. This is also identified using the annual PI worksheet. Next slide. Okay, so what is not remote consent? So the remote consent policy does not cover verbal consent and telephone consent, which we define as verbal consent obtained by phone. Verbal consent involves the participant only giving verbal consent to participate and does not involve the signing of a consent document. If the study plans to utilize either process, either verbal consent or a telephone consent, the study must be approved for a waiver of documentation of consent by the convened CRB, and a script must be approved by the CRB as well. Next slide. Okay, so we've made some revisions to the principal investigator worksheet. Next slide. So we revised the CRB principal investigator worksheet to include the common responses to some of the questions as checkbox selections instead of free text fields in the form. So we are hoping that this will make it easier for institutions to complete this worksheet with consistent responses. This also makes it easier for the CRB to obtain information when reviewing for local context and for reports. So as a reminder, active PIs are expected to update this worksheet during their anniversary months, even if there are no changes. The information fields that were not updated with this new worksheet will contain the same information as before and will be copied over to this new worksheet. The fields that changed from free text to checkbox lists will need to be completed this next time. So when completing the worksheet, if you select copy to amend, it will highlight the changes. And next slide. So that is the end of my presentation. And if you have questions, please contact the CRB help desk at the number I provided with this slide. And thank you for your time.
So we have 1 or 2 moments available here as well. If anyone has a quick question for our CIRB presenters, either Angela or Laura, who's here with her.
And we have a question in the Q&A. Do you anticipate the remote consent process to continue past the COVID pandemic? Many of us have found this to be a useful and convenient way for both patients and research staff.
And so I can answer that. We are discussing continuing the remote consent process past the COVID emergency. We haven't quite figured out the process, for doing it, but it is something that we're likely going to include past COVID emergency.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you both for being with us today, Laura and Angela. And if other questions come in, we're going to route those to you electronically and include them with the summary notes at the end. But we really appreciate you coming back. It's been probably way too long. And we appreciate all the changes to the website and all the ways you've been listening and conducting things. It's amazing the volume of work that gets done at the highest quality. It's really grand. So thank you for all you do. We really appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Connie.
All righty, let's pivot to the group chair's office. We're really fortunate to have representatives today. Casey Dawson, Pat Mize, and Kyle are on, and so let's go to the next slide. And Casey, start us off from GCO.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thanks for hanging in and joining another WebEx. I always think that this meeting is super informative for me, and I hope to provide some insight to you. And, this slide deck is titled Group Chair's Office, but as I was prepping this morning, I was thinking about how it's more of an administrative update. Group Chair's office is here in Portland, but it's just one of the places that this strong team works out of. And so I think Kyle's got our first update from the federal funding team, who is actually here in the Group Chair's office.
Yeah, hey, good afternoon. This is Kyle. Next slide, please. Really simple, just kind of wanted to pop into this wonderful meeting and once again provide this list of who you should contact if anyone at your site has questions. So for general funding and NCI coverage analysis questions, we have funding at SWOG.org, which loops in a bunch of different really smart people. So that's always a good one to send questions to if you're unsure, as well as any federal funding questions, whether it be agreements or where did my money go or all sorts of things. You can send that directly to me. And then we also have our wonderful folks at the Hope Foundation, Debbie and Mariella, who answer all the non-federal site payment questions, similar to the federal ones I answer. So just wanted to wish everyone well and remind you where to go. We're here to help all the time. So shoot us an email. But yeah, that's it. I'll send it back to Casey.
Thanks, Kyle. You know, as part of the prep this morning, I realized that I inadvertently left off a slide or two. And so I wanted to just loop, well, make sure you all knew who to loop in the event you had any non-federal budgets questions and or contracting questions. And so my apologies to the budget analysts and contract attorneys, but I'll go ahead and make mention here. So we've got two budget analysts that are working on every SWOG study. So they review every study to find funding needs if there are any. So Chris Pistolka and Tamika Lewis are working on budgets and also the coverage analyses that Kyle mentioned earlier. So you can find their contact information on the SWOG website, but also can reach them by this funding at SWOG.org email address. And then our contracts attorneys, Edie Van Putten, Mary Bride, and Jenny Franks are on hand to help draft and negotiate contracts with our pharmaceutical partners. They also work on material and data use agreements for the use of the specimen and data from SWOG studies, and work on licensing agreements for use of questionnaires on studies and among a lot of other things that they do for us. So you can contact them if needed at legal@swog.org. And again, my apologies for inadvertently missing their slides here, but the SWOG website has a really nice roster of all staffers. So in case you are looking for somebody, you should be able to find us there. Go ahead and take me to the next slide, please. So I'm excited to give you a quick update on SWOG Clinical Trials Partnerships, also known as CTP. Some of you may be familiar. I think we talked a little bit about it last meeting, but CTP has been around for a while in different iterations, and it is the mechanism that SWOG partners with industry. So we do this in two ways. We've got CTP distributing funding, industry funding for trial components on NCI or NCI collaborations with SWOG. And then we've been expanding our capabilities and opportunities for fully industry funded trials through our preferred partnerships platform. Next slide, please. We've been really busy building infrastructure, and thanks to some of you, we have identified some online tools that will help streamline communications and overall management of study conduct. And so we've contracted with Velos and Florence for our clinical trial management systems and electronic trial master files. And we'll be utilizing Metadata Rave as our EDC, similar to what you know on the NCI trials, but specifically for CTP. Next slide. We've been busy developing processes, and some of these are still in the works, so you'll have to stay tuned. But what we do know is that we'll be utilizing WCG IRB as our central IRB for all of our CTP industry studies. We will be notifying SWOG sites of upcoming studies. And the idea is that we will get notification to you and ask for your interest. And if you are interested in opening these studies, we'll send back a web-based feasibility questionnaire. The other thing we're planning on doing is creating and posting a national coverage analysis for every CTP study, just like we do on the federal side. Next slide, please. So we've been building infrastructure, developing processes, and we've also been working on studies. We've got several studies in the works, and I'm really excited for what we've got to offer in 2022. I promise to let you know as soon as we possibly can. There were more details on all of this given on our CTP update forum this morning by Dr. Albane, and the recording will be posted to the meeting website later, probably in a week or two. You can also find news and contact info for myself and other CTP staffers on our new CTP website. Next slide, please. And here are a few snippets from the new website. And I wanted to give a special thanks to Frank DeSanto and Morgan Cox for the work that they've done on the website. It looks really fantastic. Next slide, please. So as I wrap up, and I told Connie I'd try not to talk too fast, but I'm not sure that I accomplished that goal. But as I wrapped up, I wanted to just thank you for all of the work that you do. And I wanted to thank you for coming here and staying updated. This is a picture of my dog Sylvie sitting at my desk at the group chair's office. And it looks like she's reviewing all of my work. And I, as part of my talk today and always, I think it's important for you all to know that we're always looking to improve. And next slide, please. Hopefully you are more easily impressed than my dog Sylvie here, who looks less than impressed at the work. No, but in all seriousness, though, I am always open and available to take questions and or feedback. So if you're interested in getting in touch, my last slide should have been a contact slide, but you can find me or staff on the SWOG website. Thanks again, Connie, for inviting us.
Thanks so much, Casey, Kyle, and Pat. I know that you're here as well. We have about, I think, 1 or 2 minutes if there's a quick question. Anyone have anything you'd like to ask at this point of GCO?
There is a question in the chat wondering if the head CRA for each SWOG member will be contacted by CTP for trial opportunities, or will it extend beyond the head CRA?
So currently, and Dana may be able to jump in here, I believe it's the head CRA is one of the main contacts. We may have other contacts associated with the email that we have on file for our members.
Thank you.
Well, that's a lovely segue. Thank you, Casey, for many, many things, but even segueing so wisely. Next up on our docket here is Dana Sparks from Operations. Dana, I know that you just had a few comments to make, so maybe you can weigh in now. Do we still have Dana with us?
I believe she needs to be unmuted. If we can take care of that, please.
Joelle, is there a way we can manually unmute Dana, or?
It doesn't seem like it.
Okay, well, Dana, text me when you're available and we'll bring you back on. So I think in the meantime, if we could move then to Connie Barnes. Connie's here for membership, so next slide, please.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can.
Okay,
welcome.
Great. Nice being with everybody today. I just have 2 announcements, and I'm really, really excited to announce that we have 2 new employees within the SWOG offices. We have first Daisha Christian, who was hired as our SWOG Latin America specialist. She's actually in the Crb office in Seattle, but I've been working very closely with her and working with her training. She's been doing a great job. She's been with us several months now already, and been providing support to the Latin America sites. You know, some of her duties are to provide support in all things related to the membership, you know, department, and also to provide support with the protocol department and implementation and the studies and getting their interest in their participation interest on the studies, as well as some regulatory assistance. She's also going to provide support in planning SLAI events, as well as provide some translation support and working to create a workbench to help them with all of the their needs in Latin America. We also then hired, just started, Lacey Tigerson, and she just started last Wednesday. So she's brand new, catching on very well, but she's assumed the membership position from Kyra Stemley, who left us in May. She'll be responsible for onboarding all the staff through RUMS and NCORP SIS and assigning SWOG ID numbers. Some of you, let's see, she'll also be working with handling our SWOG pharmacy database. She'll also be responsible for processing our committee membership applications, along with some other duties and support for the department. So I'd just like to welcome those two formally and to the committee, but that's all I have.
All right, Connie, thanks so much for being with us tonight. So let's go back to Dana. I understand that she's available now and unmuted. Dana, are you there?
I am. Can you hear me?
We can. Hi.
Great. Yeah, I had to log in twice, so there's two of me on the list, and I think the unmute was going to the wrong one. I did want to mention that for those of you who know Kara Lawback, she has been protocol coordinator with SWOG for quite a while, but she's now become our training manager, and the clinical trials resources page on the website that Connie mentioned earlier is all Kara's doing. And I really wanted to reinforce that there's a lot of information there that's really, really helpful. It's basically a clearinghouse of all kinds of clinical trials resources, including training and guidance documents and just all kinds of options that are available to you. Most of these are publicly government sites or other publicly available training and guidance documents. So it's basically a way of gathering all of that information in one place so you don't have to hunt it down. I also wanted to mention briefly that just like I think everyone in the country, the operations office has been dealing with quite a bit of turnover lately. So you'll see a lot of new faces and names soon, and we want to ask you guys to have patience with us because we're in heavy training mode right now with a lot of new people on board. And then finally, I really wanted to mention just quickly the new platform studies that are coming up. We will be opening an IMatch pilot study probably in the spring. We're hoping February or March. And that will not be the full platform, but will be a pilot to help us figure out some of the details of what will go into the platform eventually. But the MyeloMatch study and the Combo Match study are both really gearing up to open also probably in the spring or early summer. So you guys will start to see those studies coming out, and the design is for both of those studies is very different in that it's much like the original NCI match in that the screening study will be run by one group, but all of the clinical trials that are part of those platforms will be run by all of the different NCTN groups. So I'm excited about having these new opportunities for research coming out and giving us the chance to have multiple studies done kind of under the same umbrella, similar to MAT and to LungMap, and looking forward to having those open up soon. And I think that's all I have.
Just that little bit. You never have anything going on, Dana Sparks. Good heavens. That's awesome. Thank you for those updates. We're excited to hear them. So let's move forward now. If you can advance, Joelle, I think 2 slides. Our next presenter is Kathy Rankin, so 1 more slide. Kathy's here to represent the SWOG Statistics and Data Management Center update. Thank you for being here, Kathy. Take it away.
Thanks a lot, Connie, for having me, and just for giving us a chance to provide a few updates from the Statistics and Data Management Center. First thing is, with continued travel restrictions, our mentoring team would like you all to know that they're now able to offer virtual workshops where they can tailor topics and schedule to the specific needs of each site. So they can fit into maybe an existing staff meeting or create a virtual retreat presenting on topics that are of particular relevance to you. Some of the topics can include clinical research and clinical practice, FDA inspection readiness, clinical trial principles, some of the data systems that we're using from SWOG or CTSU, data quality, remote monitoring, or any other topics that you might need. Next slide. So if you are interested in capitalizing on this continued education via customizable mentoring workshops, please contact Donna Mera. Email and phone number is here, and she can help talk about the needs and select customizations that you would like to train your site staff. Next slide. A few updates on specimen submission and institutional performance metrics. In the spring of 2020, SWOG removed specimens from performance metrics due to the impact of the pandemic. Starting in February 2022, we're going to reinstate specimen submissions into our IPR measures. But before we do that, we're going to send out site-specific lists listing out your outstanding specimens at your site. So start looking for these site-specific lists in mid-December. We want to be able to give your site plenty of time to send any outstanding specimens collected before this would count against you in your performance metrics. Next slide. Just a reminder to review your expectation report carefully. And if you have any questions, the disease committee email should be your first point of contact. These contact emails are always included on the bottom of the initial protocol contacts page in each protocol. It would be something like guquestion@crab.org, etc. One note, if you are doing batch shipping of specimens, please honor the limits, including no more than 5 participants or 50 specimens in each shipment. That's a note from Nationwide from the meeting this morning. And then one last reminder on specimens, that if a specimen was not collected at a stated time point, please log into the specimen tracking system. And on the home page there, you can see a link and you can notify us that the specimen was unable to be submitted. And the act of doing this will resolve this expectation. Next slide. And we're excited to report that the data from our phase 2 trial of atezolizumab in BCG unresponsive non-muscle invasive bladder cancer may be submitted to the FDA. But there's still a lot of work before this can happen. So you may have already noticed an increased number of queries that have been posted on S1605 in your RAVE charts. Next slide. And here's a summary of some of the work that's to come. There's a new cycle-specific form that will be rolling out, and that this will be capturing results from protocol-specified labs. This will be capture labs that were already done during the treatment interval for each patient. We will also be requesting documentation of additional labs or procedures conducted in response to adverse events. These would be things like cultures, EKGs, additional labs that were ordered. Also, you will see additional documentation requests for high-grade recurrence, muscle invasive disease, cystectomy, and metastatic disease. Additional queries will be posted. Particularly, these are going to be related to inconsistencies that exist between the adverse event form, treatment forms, and off-treatment notice. You will see requests for missing concomitant medication forms and any other missing or incomplete forms. And once all of these data have been received and reviewed, We will be asking our investigators to electronically sign the RAVE charts. And for those of you who've had investigators already do this, we thank you. We know this was a bit of a hassle. Unfortunately, because we need to obtain further detailed data for this regulatory submission, all charts are going to need to be signed once again. Next slide. Genentech will be providing additional funding for all of this activity. And so look forward to updated funding memo and other details about data and form requests in the weeks ahead. We will be bringing in a consulting firm, C3 Consulting, to work with sites to obtain additional data. And the SWOG study team will work closely with C3 Consulting and Genentech to achieve the goals of having an FDA data. C3 will also be contacting you directly to set up meetings and discuss data needed from your particular site. And I just want to thank everybody, and we know we can't do this without you. So thanks in advance for your continued support of this important trial. Please continue to keep the trial open at your site. And if your site has already closed the study with your IRB, C3 Consulting will be working with you to reopen the study, and funding will be available to cover the IRB review and any other regulatory costs in doing so. Next slide. Just a few other updates. The SDMC is in the planning stages of sending out a regular report to sites showing which patients were recently deemed ineligible. The hope is that if a patient is ineligible due to either erroneous or missing data, that these issues can be cleaned up quickly and that we can reduce the number of ineligible participants in our trials. RAVE forms in future trials are no longer going to be including that save without submitting button at the bottom of each form. This feature is really no longer offers any additional functionality to our forms because we've improved the logic on each of our electronic forms over time. Simply saving an incomplete form offers the same functionality that this button provided. And then just one last note to let you know that we are currently in the process of adding a new metric to our IPR measures for overdue queries. So look for more information on this in the future. But at this time, we can just ask that you review your outstanding queries now. And because the DQP has all of the RAVE data in it, you may also want to pay particular attention to the trial and queries from the pre-RAVE EBC, as those can be pretty easily overlooked. And I just want to thank you for your time and all that you've done, especially during the pandemic. Thank you.
Thanks, Kathy. Does anyone have questions that you'd like to bring forward for SDMC? While we're waiting for that, I guess I'll ask one question. Do you have an idea of a timeline for S1605 work? I wish I could say I'm thrilled to hear it, but after the last go around with S0777, it's coming to mind rapidly here.
Connie, I don't. I just heard from our study team just to be looking forward to things coming in the future. But maybe I can get that information and then put it and give it to you to include in the summary.
Okay, that'd be great. Just ballpark even roughly when we think it will come, just as we plan for the future. Sometimes we're looking a year out, just trying to figure out how to keep the lights on the bus and the wheels going forward. It's just good to know.
It is, and all I can say is, you know, you might be seeing more queries now, and I see from our study team, S1605 timeline is hoping to wrap up in the spring of 2022. Thanks, Melissa.
So wrap up meaning the site work will be all done, or we'll just be beginning? So by the time we meet next, this will already be history?
Is there a way we can unmute Melissa Pletz, if she's one of the study statisticians, and would have more information, and then I wouldn't just be reading her comments in the chat?
Can you all hear me?
Oh,
yes,
we can, Melissa. Thank you.
Hi, this is Melissa. I'm one of the statisticians on this study, and we are finishing up contracts right now to finalize those extra payments for all that hard work that the sites are going to help us with. And so we're hoping really to get started on all this work very soon, and hopefully, depending on the responsiveness from our sites, hoping to wrap it up and have it done maybe in the spring of 2022. I know that the timeline is pretty aggressive coming from Genentech. They're anxious. So we're going to try to, get this nice quick.
Okay, we'll work on our morale boosting in the interim here and get excited about this, but it just, the more lead time you can leave for the sites and the more support and consistent responses you can give to us, I'm just speaking from experience, that will be enormously helpful. And the Genentech can be aggressive all they want, but with our site constraints, I'm just putting in a vote for rational, reasonable logistical support, please. And other than that, we're excited that our work is coming forward and getting FDA approval. That's a good thing. No complaint, just practical help would be welcome.
It's a lot of work and we just appreciate everybody's time.
Well, thanks for the warning, Kathy. Great updates. All right, so I think we're pretty much on time here. We're going to keep moving. Our next presenter is Elaine Armstrong. So Elaine, I just want to warn you, there's some formatting, interesting font presentation with your stuff, but we can read it and it looks really cool, actually, like you did it on a typewriter and it's really impressive. So with that, just have you take it away and share with us what you're learning and want us to learn about auditing and quality assurance. Thank you.
Okay, I'm unmuted, so hopefully you can hear me.
You can?
Yes, we can.
Okay, next slide. I just wanted to make you aware of a pilot project for a new protocol deviation form that will be rolling out with S2012, which is expected to be activating soon. This is a pilot project that's being initiated by the NCI. This is not our pilot project, but we're just participating. The CTSU website has some overview slides, webinar links, some Q&As. Currently, ECOG Akron has EA 2201 has already rolled out this form. My take on it is it's going to be a time-consuming, cumbersome process. And it's kind of soon to say, I thought that it would be for major deviations only, but according to NCI, they want everything. Go to the next slide. I have some pages of the form. The first page of the form is, just some basic dates and who the person was that identified the deviation. Did you report it to this IRB? Next form. And then it's next form. Next page, whatever it's called. Then there's just some information and, so like for inclusion, exclusion criteria, they want you to provide information. Next page, next. Then there's drop-down list for the main. And this is where, even though they're saying they want lesser deviations, what's listed on this form is for major stuff. So I'm not real clear myself on how this is going to work. And next page. So this is their standardized terms, and one more page, which is the last page. Oh, I guess that was it. And then you'll also have to report deviations identified during audits on this form. So all I can tell you is it's a pilot and we'll definitely need input from everybody, because I do think it's going to be an added burden to the sites, but you're the ones that have to tell us that. So just letting you know that it's out there, and some of you may have already experienced this form through an ECOG Akron study. I don't know if any of the other groups have one or not. Then the next thing I wanted to talk about was the writing of the Aepv's writing steady agent orders, which Andrea had already talked about this. So I don't really have a whole lot more to add to this other than the DTLs. When this went into effect, were automatically updated to include the NPIVR's option to be added to the TTL for the IND prescribing task. So fortunately, I didn't have to go in and update that DTL. So it's just up to you to now add them to your DTL if they're going to be writing orders. And of course, as you mentioned, that you also should have an SOP then outlining, what your procedures are that allows them to do this. I mean, it's based on local, state, and state regulations. Next page, next slide. Then the other thing that came out at the same time basically was that the DCP guidelines on use of APPs now is going to allow these advanced practice providers to serve as chairs on protocols. They can be, also now be able to enroll patients. They have to be actively rostered as an NPIVR in DRCR, but you will not have to do any other credentialing. If you have APPs that you want to register patients, nothing more needs to be done as far as credentialing. The only thing is that most of these studies do not have investigational agents, which means there probably is not going to be a DTL, but SWOG has the site authority log, which is, the old paper version or PDF version of the form that we expect you to fill out to cover basically all NCI studies. So you will need to add them to to your site authority log and give them the option of being able to verify eligibility. That's the tasks that will need to be added to those if you're going to let them enroll patients. And next slide, and I'm not sure I have any more slides. Oh, and just an update for remote audits. I know we've talked about this a lot, and there's going to be some stuff about this. Now, I think it got taken off the open forum list, but it continues to be pretty much the default for registration study audits because they're small. But for treatment audits, we're just working with sites, just determining the best option based on the current travel restrictions at your site, what access we have to source documentation. We still really recommend the audits be conducted on site for the large sites, but we will work with you and make things work the best we can. And I'm seeing an uptick. We're doing a few more on site than we had, say, 6 months ago. So just so you know where we are on that. And I think that may be my last slide. Any more? I can't remember. I guess that was it. And that's all I have.
Thank you, Elaine. Any questions for Elaine about QA or auditing? Kathy, while we're at it, could I circle back to you for a second? There's some chat here about the study that you just mentioned in S9808, and it's only showing to hosts and panelists. So could you summarize for all of our attendees the dialogue that you guys have about S1605 and closing at the CIRB, yes or no?
Yes, 1605 will not be closing with the CIRB at this point in time. It's still considered open. The question was it gonna, because it's in the long-term follow-up study S9808, is it gonna be closing with the CIRB? And the answer is no, not at this point in time.
Okay, thank you.
Connie, this is Elaine. Just one, I have provided some guidance to some sites. I've been contacted by a couple of sites who had closed the study because they no longer had patients that they were following, and we've asked them to reopen it. And with the CIRB, they said then you just need to submit your, I don't know, the form to reopen it, and be sure make note that you had it open previously. So then it's kind of just paperwork trail to get it reopened. If you have it open, had it open with your local IRB, we also ask you to reopen it, and then you can just submit a request to open it to expedited review for follow-up activities only. Doesn't need to be a major ordeal where you review the entire protocol. So that is the guidance we're providing for that. And that way, even though you're no longer following patients, that allows you to continue to submit data as if there are new requests, if there are requests for new data.
Okay, thank you.
So I think there's a bit of a follow-up question to that, wondering if the process of closing or transferring to a local IRB studies that are S9808 applicable, is that incorrect?
Dana, can you help here, or Elaine?
I'm not sure what the question is. I was contacted by someone about a week ago because they wanted to close the study with the CIRB and transfer it to their local IRB under S9808. And I discouraged that. I'm not sure what the point would be. You know, eventually S9808 is going to go away when everything is under the purview of the CIRB. It's not going to happen in the next year or two, but eventually. So I discourage, you know, I don't see any reason for ever closing something with the CIRB to move it back to a local IRB. I just don't understand the rationale for that, but I'm not sure if that's where you're going with the question.
Okay, if the person leaving that message would like to follow up with our panelists, we're happy to take additional chats that way to make sure your question's fully answered. Otherwise, we have one last question for Elaine. With remote audits, do you have experience with Epic CareLink?
I'm sorry, what was the last part of the question about Epic?
Epic CareLink?
I'm sorry, but we audit in Epic quite frequently, but I don't know what CareLink is. You might need one of our nurses to answer that if they're available.
And this is Caitlin moderating it with VA experience, and we do not use Epic, so this is a blind leading the blind moment. Well, we'll have to follow up on that as well. We can work on that with a little more time on the back end, if that's okay with everyone.
All righty, well, thank you for the great Q&A here, and thank you to our presenters. We're going to pivot now just for our last segment of our meeting. And so next slide, please. Liz Edwards and Caitlin Hutchinson have been phenomenally helpful in preparing for this meeting for site ops, and I appreciate their help on the work group. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Liz, for thoughts on life.
So I think this is Caitlin. I think that I will take this while she manages the chat. But I do want to give a lot of credit to Liz, who built this slide set out. We're hoping to be together next meeting, but until then, we want to try to end this talk with a little bit of positivity and bring people together. Next slide, please. So we wanted to keep it light, like I said, and 'tis the time of year to be thinking about costumes and enjoying life outside of Zoom. So we have some pictures of some of our contributors' Halloween and highlight moments in life. But in addition to that, I have to stop and say that Phyllis Goodman, I think, should win the award of awards for best costume in COVID times as the toilet paper holder with a COVID-sized photobomber in the back, a little puppy helping out. So we have just some fun Halloween type questions to pull. Share your feelings and perspectives on fall and Halloween. Joelle, could we please pop the poll up? So the poll is open and everyone can click through and put your poll answers in. You can scroll through, but I'm happy to walk through as well for those people who might be having any IT issues. So candy corn, do we love it? Do we hate it? Our second question is holiday traditions, handing out candy and enjoying the kids' costumes, B, lights off, or C, making your house haunted and scaring all the children. Our third question is handing out candy, try to go in and blend in with the kids and go trick-or-treating, or give me all the candy. And then a very scandalous question of pumpkin spice lattes, give me everything PSL, only once a year, or heck no. For our fifth question, best Halloween duo, witches with black cats or goblins and ghouls? And I'll slow down a little because I might be going faster than your fingers. And then pumpkin shopping. Grab one on the way out of the grocery store. Pumpkin patch is the only way, or no pumpkins on my porch? And lastly, Halloween candy's fate. Do you eat it all on Halloween? Do you take it to work? Or do you trade? So we'll give you a moment to go through some of those questions, and then we will show the results.
I wanted to mention in the chat, it says that the QA nurse auditors do use Epic CareLink.
Thank you. Well, we're at 80% now, so hopefully we'll get a couple more people filling out their poll, but can we reveal that, Joelle? Wow, we have a pretty big split for candy corn, about 50-50 love it, hate it, with more people edging towards hate it. Don't know if that's statistically significant, though. We'd have to talk to our stats team. For Halloween traditions, it seems like most people are good sports, handing out candy and enjoying the kids' costumes. For handing out candy, it looks like we again have kind of a 50-50 split between blending in with the kids and go trick-or-treating or just giving them all the candy. Our pumpkin spice latte, so about 20% say give me all the PSL, 40% once a year, and 36% heck no. For best Halloween duo, classic witches and black cats takes the winner there. And for pumpkin shopping, while I think some of us, especially I'd imagine in COVID times, are snagging stuff on the way out of the grocery store, pumpkin patch is still a long-lasting tradition, and once in a while, some people are still not into pumpkins. And then candy's Halloween fate. So it looks like most of us are bringing it to work, so we'll have to see how that goes. Hopefully we're returning to the offices and stuff doesn't just sit stale till next year. So if you want to advance the slide, please. Happy Halloween, everyone, and thanks for letting us bring a little levity to the time of year.
Thank you, Liz and Caitlin. That was very fun and really a great way to remind us all that there's more to life than doing data and our best at research. Although we love our mission, we totally believe in it, but really appreciate you helping us to center and enjoy and remember that there's lots of great stuff to treasure in every day. Next slide, please. As we wrap up tonight, I would really like to especially thank all of our speakers. I know there's a million other things you could be doing at this hour of the day, and the updates have been so timely, so relevant. Always we thank Courtney Willie for all of her extremely profound organizational skill and support for our group. I want to thank one of the research nurses on my team, Sue Jonas, for her beautiful slide from the Tetons. She did a fabulous job, and I want to be like her when I grow up. She is doing a work-life balance and just came back from a hiking trip with the Tetons. So good job, Sue. And then special thanks to Liz and Caitlin for all their hard work in pulling the slides together and organizing the content. Last slide, please. So on that note, just encourage you to check out the rest of the SWOG meeting, especially Oishi tomorrow in the open forum. Continue to share what you learn, and we look forward to your comments and questions. And if you need anything, we're here. Take care, everyone, and thank you again for being part of the site operations meeting tonight. We really appreciate it.